My brother Marco slammed his hand on my workbench, rattling a row of wrenches. $100,000? For that rust bucket? He seethed, his face red. My sister, Sophia, crossed her arms. Her designer purse a stark contrast to the grease-stained concrete of my garage. He's lying, Marco. Dad was always right about him. Leo and that piece of junk were never going to amount to anything. I didn't flinch. I simply held up the check from the movie studio, the zeros looking back at them. This piece of junk is a 1968 Shelby GT 500, I said, my voice low and steady, and it just earned more than your yearly salaries combined. So tell me again about amounting to nothing. Marco snatched the check, his eyes scanning it like a hawk. The disbelief on his face curdled into something uglier. Raw, unfiltered greed. This has to be a mistake. Or a loan. There's no way. Sophia glided closer, her eyes fixed on the number, not the faded ink of my signature. 100,000. Marco, that's family, money. She purred the word family, dripping with a meaning I knew all too well. For them, family was a hierarchy. Marco, the VP in his tailored suit who still called Dad for approval. Sophia, the trophy wife who married rich to escape our working-class roots. And me? I was Leo, the disappointment who chose wrenches over a college degree. This garage, this life, was my rebellion. But the Shelby, that was personal. It was the last thing our father and I ever fought about. He called it a monument to my failure the day I bought it, just before the heart attack took him. He never saw what it could become. He only saw what I wasn't, a son he could brag about at the country club. And looking at my siblings, I saw his judgment mirrored in their eyes. My gaze drifted from their greedy faces back to the Shelby, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The smell of oil and metal polish was the smell of my sanctuary. But seeing them here, it was suddenly tainted by a memory, sharp and foul as burning rubber. It was 15 years ago. I was 32, and the tow truck had just dropped the skeletal remains of the GT 500 in my parents' driveway. It wasn't a car, it was a carcass. A rusted-out shell with no engine, bald tires, and an interior that looked like a family of raccoons had used it for a boxing gym. But I saw the lines. I saw the ghost of what it was, and the promise of what it could be. My father, Antonio Rossi, didn't see a promise. He saw a bill. He walked out of the house, wiping his hands on a pristine dish towel, his face a mask of cold disappointment. Marco was right behind him, already in his first ill-fitting suit, a briefcase in hand. Sophia watched from the doorway, her arms crossed then, just as they were now. "What is this trash, Leonardo?" my father asked, his voice dangerously quiet. He didn't even look at me. He just stared at the shell. "It's a Shelby, Dad. AGT 500. It needs work, but—" He cut me off with a wave of his hand. "It's a pile of junk. You spend the last of your savings on this garbage, while your brother makes partner? While your sister is planning a wedding?" He finally turned to me, his eyes like ice chips. "I gave you the seed money for a proper garage, a business, not a scrapyard for your pathetic hobbies." Behind him I saw Marco smirk, a small, self-satisfied twist of the lips. Sophia just shook her head, a perfect echo of our mother's pitying glances. They were a united front of disapproval. "This is my business," I said, my jaw tight. "Restoration, this is what I do." My father laughed, a short, bitter sound. "This isn't a business. It's a monument to your failure, Leo." He turned and walked back inside, without another word. It was the last real conversation we ever had. 2 weeks later, his heart gave out while he was on the golf course, probably bragging about Marco. Now, standing in my own garage, holding a check that could buy my father's old house twice over, I looked at my siblings. The same smirk was on Marco's face. The same pitying judgment was in Sophia's eyes. They weren't just standing in my garage. They were standing on my father's grave, trying to claim the one thing that was ever truly mine. And in that moment, I knew I wouldn't just be cashing this check. I would be using it to settle a debt that was 15 years overdue. Marco broke the silence, his voice dripping with a condescending logic he probably learned in a corporate seminar. Let's be rational, Leo. Dad gave you the seed money for this place. That wasn't a gift. It was an investment in a family business. By extension, that car, he said, pointing a manicured finger at the Shelby, is an asset of that business, a family asset. Sophia nodded, stepping forward to place a hand on my arm. Her touch felt like ice. He's right, Leo. We aren't trying to take everything. We just want our share. Dad would have wanted us to be fair to each other. Dad wanted me to sell this car for scrap, I said, my voice flat, and she recoiled as if I'd slapped her. The truth always had that effect on them. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, letting them squirm. I saw the gears turning in their heads, saw them calculating, strategizing. They thought they had me cornered. Good. Let him think it. Fine, I said, exhaling slowly. You want to talk business? We'll talk business. I walked over to my desk, picked up a pen and scribbled an address on the back of a parts invoice. My lawyer's office. Thursday morning, 10 a.m. We can discuss the family assets then. A flicker of triumph flashed in Marco's eyes. He thought I was folding. He saw lawyers and contracts, a world where he was comfortable and I was not. He took the paper from my hand. Smart decision, little brother. See? We can be reasonable. Sophia gave me a small, patronizing smile. This is for the best, Leo, for all of us. They left, and the garage was finally quiet again. The smell of their expensive cologne faded, replaced by the familiar, comforting scent of oil and steel. I knew they wouldn't wait until Thursday. Greed is never patient. My concession wasn't an act of surrender. It was a baited hook. I just had to wait for them to bite. I didn't have to wait long. The next afternoon I was returning from a supply run when I saw a sleek, black sedan parked in front of my garage. A car I didn't recognize. My stomach tightened. I cut the engine on my truck and walked toward the building, the side door slightly ajar. I slipped inside, silent as a ghost. And there they were. Marco and Sophia stood beside the Shelby like vultures. With them was a man in a crisp suit, holding a tablet and a digital caliper, his eyes roving over every inch of the car's pristine bodywork. An appraiser. The paint alone is immaculate, the appraiser was saying. Fully restored, numbers-matching engine. You're looking at a significant auction value. Well over the film rental fee. And you can provide a certified valuation for a quick sale? Marco asked, his voice low and urgent. Of course, the man replied, for a fee. Sophia saw me first. Her face went pale. Leo! Marco spun around, his expression shifting from smugness to panicked anger. He tried to compose himself, straightening his tie. Leo, we were just getting prepared for our discussion on Thursday. Getting an independent valuation. It's just business. I looked from their treacherous faces to the stranger violating my car with his gaze, his calculations. They hadn't just gone behind my back. They had invaded my sanctuary. They had brought the very judgment and transactional greed of our father into the one place I had built to escape it. I gave them a slow, cold smile. They thought this was about business. They had no idea. Get him out, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Get him, and yourselves, out of my garage, now. They had just handed me the one thing I needed to turn my plan from defense into a full-blown attack. They had given me proof. The appraiser, a slick-looking man named Henderson, looked like he wanted the concrete floor to swallow him whole. He quickly packed his tablet into a leather briefcase. Marco, however, puffed out his chest, falling back on his usual corporate bluster. Now hold on, Leo. This is a misunderstanding. We were simply doing our due diligence. Standard procedure before a major asset discussion. I ignored him, my gaze locked on Henderson. I walked toward him, not aggressively, but with a purpose that made him freeze. I stopped a few feet away and held out my hand. "Your card," I said. It wasn't a request. He fumbled in his jacket, his hands shaking slightly, and produced a business card. I took it, glanced at it, and slipped it into my shirt pocket. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice even, "you are currently on private property without the owner's permission. Trespassing. I suggest you leave before I call the police and file a report that could complicate your business license." His eyes widened. He shot a panicked look at Marco before practically scrambling for the door without another word. The sound of his sedan peeling out echoed in the sudden silence. Now it was just the three of us. The family. Sophia finally found her voice, a pathetic little squeak. "Leo, we didn't mean. Marco said it would be okay." "He was lying," I said, turning my cold gaze on my brother. "Just like you were lying about preparing for Thursday, you were preparing to steal from me. You were getting a valuation for a quick sale, hoping to pressure me with an auction price." Marco's face was a mask of fury and humiliation. "You can't prove that. It's our word against yours." I tapped the breast pocket where I'd put Henderson's card. "No, it's his word too, a professional witness you brought right to my door. I'm sure he keeps meticulous records of his client appointments. Thank you for that." I walked to my workbench and picked up a clean rag, wiping a non-existent smudge from the chrome fender of the Shelby. "The meeting on Thursday is canceled," I said without looking at them. "You can't do that," Marco sputtered. "We had an agreement." I finally looked up, letting them see the complete absence of emotion on my face. "No, you had a plan, and it just failed. Now you'll be hearing from my lawyer. He'll be in touch regarding your criminal trespassing and attempted conspiracy to defraud." I gestured to the door with the rag. "Get out of my shop." They stood there for a second, stunned into silence. The condescension and greed were gone, replaced by a dawning, sickening realization. They hadn't just been caught. They had been outplayed at their own game. Sophia's parting shot as Marco practically dragged her out of my garage was a tearful, "Dad would be so ashamed of you." For the first time in my life, that old accusation didn't sting. It felt like a badge of honor. The next morning, I wasn't at my workbench. I was in a high-rise office downtown. The sterile, quiet, a stark contrast to my life's soundtrack of roaring engines and air tools. Across a polished mahogany desk sat David Chen, my lawyer. He was a small, immaculate man with eyes that missed nothing. He'd handled the incorporation of my business years ago, and knew me as a man who paid his bills on time and never asked for trouble. I laid it all out. The history, my father's words, Marco's smirk, Sophia's pity. I told him about their family asset argument. Then I told him about Henderson, the appraiser, and placed his business card squarely in the middle of the desk. David listened without interruption, his fingers steepled. When I finished, he didn't offer sympathy. He offered a strategy. "They've made a critical error, Leo," he said, his voice calm and precise. "They've defined the terms of engagement. Your brother, the corporate VP, wants to talk business? Fine, let's talk business." He picked up the appraiser's card. "Their trespassing and attempted fraud is our hammer. But we don't use it to just scare them. We use it to pin them to the wall." He leaned forward. "Marco claims the garage is a family asset because your father provided the seed money, a dangerous claim for him to make. Because if that's true, then it's a partnership. And partners don't just share in the profits, Leo. They share in the liabilities. They share in the 15 years of expenses, overhead, taxes, insurance, and labor it took to build this business from nothing." A slow, cold smile spread across my face. I finally understood. David continued, "We're going to draft a letter. It won't be a threat. It will be an offer. An offer to formalize the family partnership they're so desperate to be a part of. We will present them with a meticulously itemized bill for their share of the business's operating costs since its inception. We'll even calculate the interest on your father's initial investment, compounded annually." "They'll never pay it," I said. "Of course not," David replied, a glint in his eye. "The number will be astronomical. It will be designed to show them that their share isn't a $100,000 windfall. It's a six-figure debt. The letter will give them two options: formally enter the partnership by paying their arrears in full, or sign a binding document relinquishing any and all past, present, and future claims to the business and all its assets, including one 1968 Shelby GT 500. If they refuse both, we proceed with the lawsuit for trespassing and conspiracy to defraud using Mr. Henderson as our star witness. He had weaponized their own greed. He had turned their argument into a cage and handed me the key. "Do it," I said. The letter, delivered by certified courier, landed the next day. The blast radius was immediate. My phone rang that evening. It was Sophia. She wasn't purring now. She was hysterical. "Leo, what is this? What have you done?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "David sent us a bill. It says we owe you over $300,000 each. Are you insane? This is a joke, right? You're trying to ruin us." I let her frantic accusations hang in the air before I responded, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "No, Sophia. This isn't a joke. It's business. I'm just being fair. I'm treating the Shelby as a family asset, just like you and Marco wanted." But that's not what we meant." "Then maybe you should have thought about what you meant before you broke into my garage," I said, and hung up. 30 minutes later, Marco called. There was no hysteria in his voice, just pure, unadulterated rage. "You son of a bitch," he spat, the words tight with fury. "You think you're so clever, having your shyster lawyer cook the books to invent some fantasy debt. This will never hold up in court." "You're welcome to find out, Marco," I said, walking over to the Shelby and running a hand over its cool metal roof. "The initial court filing will include a sworn deposition from Henderson, the appraiser you hired. I wonder how your board of directors will feel about the VP of their company being named in a fraud conspiracy lawsuit. It's hard to project an image of corporate responsibility from a witness stand." There was a choked sound on the other end of the line. I had him. I had hit him where he lived. Not his heart, but his reputation, his carefully constructed facade of success. For a moment, all I could hear was his ragged breathing. I thought he was going to fold. I thought the fight was over. I was wrong. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to a low, venomous whisper. It was a tone I hadn't heard since we were kids, right before he'd do something truly cruel. "You're a real tough guy, Leo, hiding behind your lawyer, but you're forgetting something," he hissed. "You're forgetting about Mom. She's been so frail since her last fall. I wonder how she'll handle the stress of learning one of her sons is trying to sue her other children into bankruptcy. A shock like that, at her age, it could be devastating." The line went dead. I stood in the silence of my garage, the phone feeling like a block of ice in my hand. The smell of oil and steel suddenly felt suffocating. He wasn't just fighting for money anymore. He was willing to burn the whole family to the ground, and he was ready to use our mother as the match. The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering onto the concrete. Marco's threat echoed in the sudden, crushing silence of the garage. He had found the one gear I couldn't protect, the one person I couldn't shield with lawyers and logic. My mother, Elena, a woman who measured her life in rosary beads and worried phone calls. The thought of Marco and Sophia descending on her, poisoning her with their twisted version of the story, made my stomach clench. My entire strategy, so clean and precise, was now worthless. David Chen could dismantle a corporate argument, but he couldn't protect an old woman's heart from her own children. I locked up the shop, the metallic click of the deadbolt sounding like a trap springing shut. For the first time, my sanctuary felt like a cage. The Shelby sat there, a gleaming monument to a victory I could no longer claim. Marco had been right about one thing. This was no longer about business. I drove. Not to a bar, not to my lawyer's office, but to the one place I had spent my adult life trying to escape, my childhood home. The small, neat brick house where my father's armchair still sat empty in the living room, a ghost of disapproval. As I pulled up to the curb, I saw Marco's BMW parked behind Sophia's pristine white SUV. They were already here. The vultures had landed. I walked in without knocking. They were in the living room, flanking my mother on the floral sofa. She looked smaller than I remembered, a delicate bird caught between two predators. Sophia was holding her hand, dabbing at imaginary tears with a tissue, while Marco stood, pacing, his voice a performance of strained reason and deep concern. "And we just don't know what to do, Mom," Marco was saying, his back to the door. "Leo's gone crazy. He's trying to take everything. He's threatening us with lawyers, trying to ruin us over a rusty old car." Sophia chimed in, her voice trembling with practiced fragility. "He's not the same, Mama. All that time alone in that filthy garage, it's made him cold. He wants to hurt his own family." My mother looked up then and saw me standing in the doorway. Her face, a road map of worry, crumpled slightly. Before she could speak, Marco turned. A flash of triumph crossed his face when he saw my expression. He thought I was beaten. "There you are," he said, his voice dripping with false pity. "Come to see what you've done to your mother?" I ignored him. I looked directly at my mom. "Ma," I said, my voice hoarse, "don't listen to them." "Don't listen?" Sophia shot up from the couch. "He sends us a letter from a lawyer demanding hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we're the ones you shouldn't listen to?" The room became a cacophony of their lies and accusations. I stood my ground, a silent stone in the middle of their storm, waiting for a chance to speak, a chance that never came. Then, a voice, quiet but sharp as shattered glass, cut through the noise. "Basta, enough." My mother, Elena Rossi, pushed herself up from the sofa. She wasn't looking at me. Her gaze, sharp and undimmed by age, was fixed on Marco and Sophia. "You," she said, pointing a trembling finger at Marco. "You talk about your father's money, his investment." She took a shaky breath. "Your father, God rest his soul, saw that car as garbage. He saw your brother as a disappointment. He never invested a single dollar in that garage." Marco's face went blank. "What are you talking about, Mom? Dad gave him the seed money. He told me so himself." A sad, bitter smile touched my mother's lips. "Your father told you what he wanted you to believe. He couldn't stand the thought of anyone thinking he was wrong." She turned her eyes to me, and for the first time, I didn't see pity. I saw a shared secret. The money for the garage, it wasn't from him. It was from me. The room fell silent. Sophia stared, her mouth agape. Marco looked as if he'd been slapped. "It was the money my mother left me," Elena continued, her voice gaining strength with every word. "I gave it to Leo the day after his father called that car a monument to his failure. I made Leo promise he would never tell him. I did it so one of my children could build something for himself, not for your father's approval." She took a step toward Marco and Sophia, who instinctively shrank back. "And you dare to come into my house and use me as a weapon against him? You, who have everything, try to steal the one thing he built for himself, with my money? You speak of your father's shame. No Antonia would be ashamed of **you." She stopped, her chest heaving slightly. The judgment in her eyes wasn't for me. It was for them. All the words hung in the air, heavier than iron. Marco's face, usually a mask of corporate confidence, was a ruin. The color drained from it, leaving a pasty gray canvas of shock. Sophia wasn't acting anymore. Real tears, hot with humiliation, streamed down her cheeks, ruining her expensive makeup. She stared at our mother as if seeing a stranger. Marco opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time in his life, he had no counter-argument, no clever retort. His entire case, his entire self-image as the heir to our father's legacy, had been built on a lie he never even knew existed. He wasn't the favored son. He was just the one who never disappointed a man who was already wrong. "Now," my mother said, her voice quiet but unyielding, "you will leave. You will not call me. You will not call your brother. You will go back to your big houses and your important jobs and think about the word family. You will think about what it means to have a mother who is ashamed of you." She didn't shout. She didn't have to. The words landed like hammer blows. Sophia let out a choked sob and practically ran from the room, fumbling for her car keys. Marco stood frozen for another second, his shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. He looked old, defeated. He followed her out without a single glance in my direction. The front door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was absolute. I looked at my mother. She seemed to have aged 10 years in 10 minutes, the effort of her confession draining the fire from her. She sank back onto the sofa, her hands trembling in her lap. I walked over and knelt in front of her, taking one of her hands in mine. It felt frail, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "Ma," I whispered, my own voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" She looked at me, her eyes clear and filled with a fierce, unwavering love that I had mistaken for pity for 15 years. "Your father was a proud man," she said softly, "but a mother's job is not to protect a man's pride. It is to protect her son's soul." The $100,000 check sitting in my desk drawer suddenly felt like pocket change. This was the real payment. This was the debt being settled. Has your family ever doubted one of your passions or hobbies, only for it to pay off in a huge way later? I want to hear all about your ultimate "I told you so" moments in the comments.